Lunt, and now we will move to oral communications, where members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda within the purview of the Policy and Services Committee. And if the clerk could please assist any members of the public who would like to speak to an item not on the agenda.
Of course. So I see a few attendees, although there are no hands raised at this time. If anyone would like to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 if you're calling in by phone. And at this time, I don't see any hands raised.
Thank you so much. Then we'll conclude oral communications. We'll move on to our first action item, which is a presentation and discussion of the auditor's progress on the scope of work. Welcome, Mr. O'Rourke, and I believe you have a presentation for us.
That is correct. Good evening, distinguished members of the Policy and Services Committee. Thank you very much for having us tonight, and I believe on your screen right now you should be able to see our presentation. This is a presentation and discussion of our progress thus far in our first month of work with the city, and overall progress on our scope of work outlined in the request for proposals that we responded to. Our agenda for this evening, we're going to re-review the scope of work, discuss the primary activity at the moment, which is the citywide risk assessment, which will provide an overview of our risk assessment process and our progress to date, and handle some questions and discussion on the back end. As you will find out relatively shortly, this is not the most detailed report, or we're not really providing any, asking for any action by the committee or by council, but rather want to provide an update as to where we are today. And this is our first formal presentation to the Policy and Services Committee and in front of members of the public since beginning our work roughly a month ago. And wanted to, stay in front of you all and make sure you understand where we're at and where we're headed over the next couple of months for our first formal report, which is due at the end of January, pending scheduling at the moment. Just kind of quick overview, and you all recall this probably from our proposal presentations, but my name's Kyle O'Rourke. Of course, you all appointed me as the city auditor, but there's a couple other key members to our project team. Jody Dobbs, our engagement partner, who specializes in public utilities and has been involved in those aspects of our risk assessment process. Ms. Heather Aker, who is the leader of Baker Tilly's risk advisory practice and formerly of our financial audit practice in the public sector. And Mr. Atit Shah, who is a cybersecurity and IT audit specialist. If at any point you want to reach out to specialists, I would encourage you to do so. Obviously, I'm here as well. Quick overview, a reminder sort of our scope of work. We have 6 primary tasks outlined in our contract with the city, the first of which is to conduct a citywide risk assessment. I'll sort of glance over that for the moment, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in the slides to come. Our second task is to prepare the annual audit plan, which we will be presenting to Policy and Services Committee at their first meeting in calendar year 2021. That plan will outline all of the audit activities that we are proposing for the next 6 months, and likely we will propose an audit plan for the next 18 months and refine that at the beginning of the fiscal year in July. Task 3 is related to the financial audit. We are, of course, responsible for selection of the external financial auditor and responsible for annual audit coordination. This year is a bit unique in that our process, or our contract rather, began after the audit work had been complete and the CAFR had been developed, and it was the final year of the external auditor's contract. So we're becoming familiar with the external audit process, and we've familiarized ourselves with the status of the current financial audit, and we will be assisting in delivering those results to council, but sort of unique in the timing of our relationship with the city. Task 4. Task 4 is actually executing all of the audit activities we outline in Task 2. We won't be able to speak too much on this today in that we haven't yet defined what all of those audit activities will be, but rather we can say at the moment that those audit activities will take place roughly from January onward in our relationship with the city. Task 5, there's a couple components in the title, so to speak, of the task. And then there's a couple of other items that are embedded within this task as well. But On a quarterly basis, we will prepare formal quarterly reports to City Council that will highlight our progress to date on our annual audit plan. It will also cover components such as follow-up on prior audit findings. As we proceed in our relationship, we'll want to make sure corrective actions are closed out, so we'll present sort of that follow-up as we go, as well as reports on the fraud hotline that exists within the city, which is actually one of the components of Task 5 that is not called out in the title, which is sort of the auditor's responsibility in managing the fraud hotline. Additionally, in Task 5, we'll prepare an annual status report that will be coming at the end of the fiscal year. And then lastly, Task 6 involves evaluation and sort of what is actually more formally called a peer review of the audit function within the city, as well as benchmarking the audit activities that are completed by us, the city audit function, to other comparable city agencies, similar to what was done in the prior audit function. So Task 1 is the citywide risk assessment. This is our primary activity at the moment. We're roughly a month into this process with plans to deliver reports in early calendar year 21. There's 4 phases to this process. The first phase is sort of planning. This is where we finalize our work plan, conduct project kickoff activities both internally and with the city. For example, we held a kickoff meeting with the executive leadership team a few weeks back, where we presented a risk assessment process, the roles and responsibilities of the city auditor, as well as the executive leadership team who were asking for participation. And we also discussed the timeline and the overarching purpose, which of course is to prioritize risks and ultimately arrive at an internal audit plan as a result to present to City Council for approval. Phase 2 is information gathering. There's really 2 primary components to this, the first of which is information review. So we request and review a variety of documents that are prepared by city staff, organizational charts, staffing reports, the budget, which of course is publicly available, prior financial audits, reviewing prior audits, really kind of asking for and reviewing many documents from each department within the city to gain a better understanding both of the operations but also of the risk profile. Additionally, under phase 2, we conduct interviews. As you all are aware, we conduct interviews with members of council as well as members of the executive leadership team to, again, gain an understanding of the city's risk profile, key initiatives, and ultimately help us determine audit activities that we'll conduct in the future. Phase 3 is analysis. So once we've gathered all the information, we go through a process of defining or documenting auditable areas and scoring the risks associated with those auditable areas based on likelihood and impact. Likelihood, of course, is the probability of an event, adverse event occurring, and the impact is the financial or other qualitative type impact that might occur should that adverse event take place. And finally, we'll put together a draft and ultimately finalize a risk assessment report to be delivered to the Policy and Services Committee at the first meeting in calendar year 21. I would say the risk assessment report feeds then into the internal audit plan. Of course, we're prioritizing audit activities based on the risk assessment report, but you will see those 2 reports simultaneously. Frankly, I could talk all day about the risk assessment process, but I wanted to just provide some high-level snapshot of some kind of key considerations or key risk considerations here. We consider a multitude of different risk types or risk categories. I've outlined some here. So traditionally, an internal audit or an audit function might focus on financial risks. Are we presenting our financial statements correctly? Are we recording transactional information accurately in the general ledger? Of course, we're considering those types of risks, but we go well beyond that in considering operational risks. So business process, efficiency, policy and procedure type risks. Technology, we'll consider cybersecurity, as well as other IT-related risks. We consider fraud, potential for fraud, waste, and abuse in a variety of city operations. as well as strategic risks. So City Council has sort of council initiatives. Each department has outlined, or many departments have outlined strategies, and we want to make sure that operations are designed to enable the city to achieve those strategic objectives. Compliance risks, there's many of them, not only compliance with policies and procedures developed by the city itself, but also the municipal code, state laws, federal laws, and other compliance requirements, and reputational risk. There's several other ways we can categorize risks, but those are sort of primary risk considerations. And really, we want to demonstrate that we're considering a broad array of risks to the city. I went through this on the prior slide, but we go through a risk scoring process. Essentially, it's a mathematical equation. Likelihood times impact equals our expected outcome. That's for those of you that are quantitative thinkers. Likelihood, of course, being a probability, and impact being a financial or other impact of an adverse event occurring. And of course, we have a methodology to quantitatively express qualitative risks. If it's not financial or not quantitatively expressed, we have an ability to do that and have developed a methodology to do so with the city. And in our process, we sort of right size, so to speak, that methodology based on the size of the city, the dollars spent, so that we're able to compare risks in an apples to apples manner, or as best apples to apples as we can, regardless of the risk type. Next, I want to cover progress to date. So I mentioned that we're primarily working on task one, which is the citywide risk assessment. We conducted the kickoff meeting, and actually we've conducted multiple kickoff meetings, both one internally with the team that I manage, but also with the executive leadership team. We've reviewed and are continuing to review key information that's provided by city staff. A couple of weeks back, we issued a data request, and generally leading up to each interview, the city staff respond to that, and that enables us to prepare for interviews. And as we go, we'll continue to follow up with information that might remain outstanding. We're conducting interviews. So I believe with the three members of the Policy and Services Committee, we've conducted one-on-one interview with each of you. And we are continuing to do that with other members of council and the executive leadership team. And we are beginning to conduct preliminary risk analysis. So essentially putting together our risk matrix, or defining or documenting all of those auditable areas, and beginning very preliminarily at this point to assign risk ratings in our process. Our second task is developing the annual audit plan. So generally speaking, this is pending the results of the risk assessment. As you can imagine, auditors and folks and on our team kind of start thinking ahead as we're going through the risk analysis phase. But essentially at this point, we're putting together a template for the audit plan and very preliminarily thinking about what could end up on it. But keeping in mind that we want to go through that quantitative scoring process before arriving at any conclusions. The third task, the financial audit. So we're developing an understanding based on this current year audit that's been recently completed, and working with Ms. Noze's team and the Administrative Services Division to determine a plan for delivering that to council, particularly given the unique circumstances, that being that we arrived sort of at the conclusion of the audit process, but prior to it being delivered to council. And we are preliminarily planning for the FY21 audit. As you know, the audit contract, this is the final year of the audit contract, and so we're working through what that might look like in the future. Task 4, executing the audit plan. This, of course, is pending finalization of the audit plan and approval by the council. Task 5, periodic reporting and hotline monitoring. You'll see that I sort of changed the title from what is in the RFP and contract to maybe something that's a little bit more complete. But we are currently preparing templates to perform that periodic monitoring, so quarterly and annual reporting. And we're also working on obtaining access to the hotline at the moment. That is underway, and we're working with a couple city staff on that. And then lastly, the city auditor evaluation. That has a couple of components to it. And again, this is an area where I sort of changed the title, but the city auditor evaluation, a couple of components, one of which will be an evaluation at year end and sort of a third-party review of the work that we've completed and the budget that it took to complete, but then also at the conclusion of our second year, a formal peer review. So working with ALGA, the Association of Local Government Auditors, to determine a path forward in that area. And that concludes sort of the formal remarks I had prepared and leads to sort of a question and discussion period.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. O'Rourke. And now we'll go to the public to see if anyone would like to make any public comments on action item number 1, the auditor's progress on the scope of work. If the clerk could please assist any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Of course. So this is Kim, Office of the City Clerk. If anyone would like to speak for item number 1, please raise your hand in the Zoom app. Or if you're listening by phone, please press *9. And I do see that there was one speaker, but they lowered their hand. So as of this time, there are no hands raised.
All right, thank you so much. And now I turn to my colleagues for questions and discussion on Mr. O'Rourke's presentation. Councilmember Filseth.
Thanks. Evening, Kyle. Nice to see you again. So I realize it's pretty early, but as you've sort of started looking through sort of what the preliminary plan and the assessments might look like, any particular themes kind of emerging so far? Is anything you're sort of saying, okay, we're seeing a lot of this and we might think it might go this way? Or is it still too early for that?
I'll readily admit I'm very hesitant to identify themes this early on, I would say, but with that said, I'll give you a couple, and I'll kind of caveat them as well. So as you're well aware and discuss every Monday night, the city's sort of financial position and tough financial decisions that have been made over the last several months. That's a sort of recurring theme that comes up in our discussions in a variety of ways, both in terms of sort of staffing, the current state of staff across the city, the changes that have been made, also the potential for revenue enhancement or cost reduction that might be necessary to offset some of the current financial position that's ongoing. So not necessarily directly correlated to audit activities, but definitely a theme that comes up when we talk about risk is sort of long-term financial stability. We've also talked a lot about workforce across many departments. Palo Alto's in a unique position, and generally I would say that many public sector organizations are in a unique position. Speaking on the latter first, there's a multitude of areas within the city and generally across the public sector where there's pending retirements, and planning for that is definitely a challenge. Utilities is not a unique area, not a unique risk consideration for Palo Alto, but plenty of pending retirements in the utilities across the country, and not enough workers to sort of back them up. So definitely a challenge in terms of succession planning, workforce planning as it pertains to the workforce. Specifically for Palo Alto, there's unique challenges in regards to the cost of living within the city, how far people commute to work within the city, challenges in recruiting and retaining positions just generally. That's a challenge or risk that's come up in many of our interviews. And the last area that I would say, and this we have yet to dive deep enough to comment specifically on Palo Alto, but an area that comes up in public sector organizations that I have a feeling will arise in the city of Palo Alto, as well as sort of cybersecurity and IT security. Generally, governments are subject to hacking attempts, phishing attempts on a daily basis, and it's very challenging given the amount of technology that the city has to manage to prevent those sorts of attacks. So, ensuring that the city has a mature cybersecurity program in place is sort of key to mitigating risks, both now and into the future. So I sort of half answered your question with some real examples, but also generally speaking to the public sector, but those are some areas that certainly have come up initially.
Any particular surprises where you sort of get through and you go, gee, most cities are like that, but you know, these guys are over here, right? I mean, anything you sort of really didn't expect or that stands out?
Nothing off the top of my head. Nothing
Okay.
that I found overly surprising. I would say though, it's hard to shake me. So, but nothing that comes to mind.
We're easily shaken. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Filseth. Councilmember Koo, do you have questions for Mr. O'Rourke? No. Okay. Well, Councilmember Filseth asked my question, which was about surprises. So glad to hear that there are no surprises so far. Thank you so much for coming and for methodically going through all of the steps. We look forward to seeing you here often and getting going on the actual audit work itself. So thanks so much.
Great.
Any other last comments or any wrap up you'd like to provide, Mr. O'Rourke?
I would just say, I think we skipped the final slide, or at least I'm no longer sharing, but my final slide had kind of contact information for anybody
Okay.
that's on the line that I can see, or alternatively, any members of the public who might have joined. If you ever feel the need to reach out, my contact information is on the city's website and can very easily be located. Feel free to call or send an email if you'd like to speak or share anything with me.
Why don't you just
But
read
thanks
out
so
your
much.
Why don't you just read out your email right now, just in case anyone's listening.
I will share it.
Even better. Okay. Thank you.
I gotta advance a couple. Oops. There we go.
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straight.
city.auditor@cityofpaloalto.org. Okay, and for those that have trouble seeing the screen, which we get that complaint a lot, I'll just read out 650-329-2667. Great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. O'Rourke, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right, that brings us to action item number 2, which is a discussion and recommendations regarding the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, known as CEDAW, as a component of citywide diversity and inclusion efforts. Is there a staff presentation?
Yes, yes, there is. And the clerk will help me share the presentation.
All right, welcome to Assistant City Manager, Ms. Susan Henney.
Yes, thank you. Because I'm such a disaster at sharing my screen.
This is Kim, Office of the City Clerk. I'm pulling your slide up right now, so just be a second.
Right. I will say that tonight we have a few staff members on hand in case there are questions or comments that are that come up during the presentation or after. So once we get there. Okay, next slide. So tonight we're continuing a discussion that we started last month, thinking about CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The recommendations from the staff are those initial recommendations that we believe can be handled in a timely manner and can come to fruition in a relatively reasonably short amount of time. So we're asking that policy and services direct us, to proceed with a community summit, similar to the summit you may remember that was held on vaping, though we certainly welcome your input and thoughts on how we may want to proceed with this particular summit so that we can have both community members and experts participate. And it will provide us the opportunity to learn more about the issues facing our community and prepare and identify a path forward for those items that we want to prioritize whether it's a study, further analysis of programs or services, or particular outreach or collaboration in the community. Recognizing that we can't do all things all at once, this would be a good opportunity for the staff to be involved and to listen and learn from those in the community who have a longstanding interest in this topic. We'd also like for you to consider and direct the human resources staff to report on the demographics of the workforce, job classifications, and gender. This is actually work that is going on as part of the race and equity as a result of the ad hoc work that's been going on this summer. So this would be an additional layer in that work. And then the third recommendation builds on that to include gender as an element of our ongoing diversity and inclusion initiative, so that if we are doing analysis or looking at specific topics, we will include gender as one of those factors, whether we're looking at policy work or at practices within city, as well as services to the community. Next slide, please. So this was the motion made last month. Just as a reminder to you, you were seeking a range of options for next steps, looking at our staff availability and potential workload going forward. We've made a recommendation based on our thinking right now as to what we would be able to reasonably accommodate. And the costs would be minimal because it would be incorporated primarily into staff work and would be support for the summit itself. Given that we're in a virtual environment at this point, we would likely have an all virtual engagement opportunity unless we planned it a little further out and things in the current health orders have moved to a place where we're able to gather in person. I did want to mention that we have made contact with Palo Alto Unified School District. We are in conversation with their staff related to race, and we have contacts for their Title IX initiatives, as well as we also plan to reach out to Stanford on that topic as well. Next slide, please. So again, just as a reminder, the topics that we presented were confirming, going from bottom to top, confirming gender equity as an element in the diversity and inclusion initiative, using the workforce demographics related to gender as part of that work and connecting it to the citywide diversity work that will be ongoing as a result of the ad hoc referrals. And you'll be discussing that at your Monday council meeting, the next steps on race and equity. And one of those initial first actions out of it would be to host a summit and refer findings back to policy and services for discussion and prioritization in terms of next steps. And next slide. I believe that concludes. Yes, that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, we have staff available for other input as needed.
Thank you, Ms. Susan Honey. Before we go to the public, since this is a continued item, perhaps I see the city attorney is with us. You could remind me if we should be careful about who we take comment from, or if we can be generous and allow anyone who wishes. Yes, I'm seeing nodding
Yes.
about generous.
Yes,
Excellent.
generally committees are generous with this type of meeting.
Even though it's continued. Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. All right. So now let's go to members of the public who wish to speak to us on this item. And if the clerk would please assist them with making their comments. I know we received at least 2 via email earlier. So
Yes, thank you, Chair Cormack. This is Kim, Office of the City Clerk. If anyone would like to speak for this item, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 on your phone. I do see one public speaker, or actually now a few. First speaker is Cheryl Spencer, followed by Chuck Jagoda, then Helen Young. Each speaker will have 2 minutes on the clock. So Cheryl Spencer, allow you to talk. Can you hear us, Cheryl?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, councillors. I'm Cheryl Spencer, a member of the Palo Alto branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and of the coalition called Cities for CEDAW. Our coalition is glad to read the staff status report your committee is discussing tonight and urge you to accept it. We see the 3 recommendations the city manager is making to the whole city council and heartily agree with them as parts of a process to bring the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women to bear in the city of Palo Alto. There are several organizations in our Coalition for Cities, for CEDAW, and we stand ready to help you design and organize the community summit described in item 1. We urge that this be an open to all summit, not an by invitation only meeting. I will provide some names and email addresses to your appropriate staff of people who can help organize the summit. We are glad to read that city staff are following the CEDAW work of various cities and our county. They have lots of expertise in how to make cities more gender equal in all aspects of life, not just in the city's workforce. Nevertheless, we support the second recommendation, which will create some baseline data on the city's workforce, which we hope will include pay rates and actual salaries. Although we realize pay data should not be identifiable to particular workers. Including the issue of gender equity in the city's ongoing diversity and inclusion initiative is a fine idea, which we hope will happen. In the report, it says prior Human Rights Commission committee work has included studies of gender and related discrimination in Palo Alto. I am not aware of these studies, and as the HRC has said it will not be working on CEDAW, I think it will be useful for staff to distribute any reports on these past HRC studies. Thank you, councillors, for your continuing attention to this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Next, we have Chuck Jagoda. Mr. Jagoda, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you for this opportunity to share my observations based on the history of consideration of a CEDAW proclamation by the city of Palo Alto over the past 4 years, as reported in the 5-page report, I believe by the city manager's office. My question is, how long, Palo Alto? How long can you possibly drag this out? It's already obvious the various city council members, the HRC members, and the Policy and Services Subcommittee of the Palo Alto City Council are very patient with very little progress toward a statement. The 5-page statement is a paean to procrastination. If there's any enthusiasm or even duty to pass or even come up with a CEDAW proclamation, why do you put it off so many times in the last 4 years? Even this 5-page report is full of conditions, barriers, and qualifications. The intent is obviously to continue in the long, strong tradition of not now that characterizes the whole history of even considering a proposal of any kind at all. The only message I get from the document is a definitive no, not us, not now, not until many, many conditions are satisfied. Oh, and it can't cost any more to study this or enact anything than the costs that are already budgeted for delivering us from our present state of discrimination against women. The history to date and the language of the document says no, loud and clear, to any substantive progress towards a CEDAW statement. What would say yes? I suggest holding up the highly regarded work of the city of Berkeley. Examine their progress. See how close we can come to that model. Stop procrastination. Risk assessment? What about benefit assessment? Why is everything about the statement so negative? Why is Palo Alto so afraid to throw off the chains of the dead hand of the past? Let's stride forward into a better life for women in the community. What are we afraid of? Whatever it is, we are really afraid of it. Thank you.
Clerk Lunt, I believe you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Jagoda. The next speaker is Helen Young. Ms. Young, let us know if you can hear us.
I can hear you and I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
You've got 2
My
minutes.
name is Helen Young. I'm a longtime resident of Palo Alto, a member of the UNA USA, United Nations Association, Palo Alto chapter, AAUW, Association of American University Women, and WIN, which is the Women's Intercultural Network. And I'm a member of the Palo Alto Coalition of Cities for CEDAW. I urge City Council members and city staff, as you begin the first steps for implementing the long overdue gender equity plan for Palo Alto, to always think about the gender implications of all of your city decisions, especially those related to the budget. I encourage you to read widely about how other cities have implemented the principles of CEDAW. Learn what steps they've taken to ensure gender equity in their cities, and think deeply about what Palo Alto can do to move beyond the negative gender image of Silicon Valley. A first step might be to read the article, Integrating Gender into Government Budgets, A New Perspective, by Marilyn Marks Rubin and John Bartle, and that's available on the web. And please consider asking for help. And I was so glad to hear the staff members say that they're going to be talking to people at Stanford. The Clayman Institute has done some really remarkable work with helping Silicon Valley companies recognize gender bias and alleviate it. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Chair Cormack, going back to you, there are no more hands raised.
Thank you to our 3 public speakers and to the clerk for assisting them in participating in our meeting. And now I turn to my colleagues for questions, comments, and maybe we'll do a round of that before we move to motions, unless it's perfectly clear. Councilmember Koo.
First, I want to say thank you to Chair Cormack for bringing this this agenda item to Policy and Services, getting it started. It has been a while and waited for it for all last year, but this is a special year. There was a lot of with shelter in place, etc. So for you to bring it, it's very appreciated. I did want to ask, what do you envision the summit? So it's going to be like the vaping summit. what could you give me a little bit understanding of what you envision it to be like?
Well, that was one example of a summit. There are other opportunities. I know that Kristen O'Kane and Minka Vanderswag from the Community Services Department may have one or the other may have some additional thoughts on how we could organize it.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Councilmember Koo. So we haven't done really any planning around the summit yet. I think we would need to get a team together to start planning that. But the way the vaping breakfast or summit went, as you probably recall, is that it was invite only and it was community leaders to talk about the subject. I think we would likely do something similar for this summit. And, there's always the possibility of opening it up to the public, especially now that we're doing everything online and virtually, that people could actually observe it through a Zoom or something. So we're still working on it. We haven't really identified who would be invited to the summit, but we're ready to go and ready to get that planned.
If I may ask for consideration of this, because we live in Palo Alto and it's a very diverse nation in terms of nationality, and each country has a little bit different discrimination towards women. I was wondering if maybe you could look into the different ethnic backgrounds and have somebody speak about what they've experienced, what they know about the discriminations in their country, and even with religion, if that could be a consideration.
Sure, I think that's a great suggestion, council member, and we'll look into how we can address that.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Councilmember Koo. Councilmember Filseth?
Thanks. I was going to kind of ask some of the same territory Lydia just did, which is we'd like to hear more about the summit. When are you thinking this might take place?
I'll go ahead.
I assume it'd be by Zoom and so forth. Right?
I'll let Kristen give us
what you were going to answer. So that is a great question, council member. It would be likely by Zoom because I think we'll do it in a time frame that's in the near future. So I would say, definitely I'm thinking in 2021, but probably early 2021. We again haven't really started planning this event yet. We would start that immediately as soon as we were given direction to do so.
Got it. And this will be organized in-house as opposed to having somebody else do it?
It would be organized in-house. So the vaping one was really organized through the Healthy City, Healthy Community working group and hosted by the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. So I think one of the first things we'll do is explore opportunities to partner like we did with the vaping summit. But we'll be planning most of it in-house.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask a question about the HR study. Is this even a meaningful question to ask? Is it doable in such a way that, we sort of generate this year and then to like generate it again next year, we like push a button and the whole thing happens and it's sort of IT centric? Is that even a rational question?
I think that's a very rational question, actually. Nick Reish from HR is here and he can let us know how easy or difficult that would be.
Good evening, council. It's good to see everyone. So that is a question that our ad hoc staff have been discussing around our entire demographic dashboard that we're discussing about how we would put it together and how we would build it to give ourselves exactly what you're talking about is year after year, some sort of trend analysis. Right. So that we can see when we establish goals, whatever those goals might be and how we measure them, are we making progress or not? So there's a couple, and And I won't bore you guys with too much details, but there's a couple things going around in the background about which particular date we choose to pull the data each year to make it consistent, get rid of any oddities, and make it an easy once a year upload for consistency purposes. So I hope that gives you enough of the answer to that, that we are thinking about that and we believe that we will be able to get to that place.
Okay. All right. September 10th is a good date.
September
birthday,
10th.
but- Yeah, it's my birthday, but okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You definitely had me stumped there, Councilmember Phil Seth. I was trying to think what was special about that day, and now I know. So
It's surprisingly obscure.
thanks for letting me know. That's good. All right, learn something every day. Thank you to staff for bringing this back. I really appreciate the extra effort that's been put into it. I think we're much closer to the opportunity to take action. I'm just taking them in order on this summit. I really appreciate Councilmember Ku's suggestion. One of the things I had written down was maybe even a slightly larger track. One of the tracks perhaps for this could be cultural, religious, and spiritual activities. Another track maybe could be health and wellness. Another track could be lifelong education. And one of the things I think would be great, in addition to having experts, would be to have girls and women of all ages who live here in Palo Alto. So we can sort of see the arc of things that happen in the lives of girls and women that are unique. So I've done at least one of these. It wasn't virtual at the time, but the idea of having sort of a plenary session and then having people have the ability to choose a breakout, maybe 2 of them, and then come back together might be one way to manage the Zoom fatigue that we all experience, and to give people the opportunity to choose something that they're interested in. I do think it's appropriate for it to be inclusive. We might have a panel of people who were invited, but I do think the idea of letting others attend would make sense. I think like about the Mothers Symposium, for example, it's held on a Saturday, and that would allow us to be sure that girls who are in school can attend. So I like the idea of having experts and community members. I think we should also think hard about what it is we want the outcome to be. So I know we'd want recommendations to come back to policy and services, but we might have, perhaps staff will be able to generate a few questions that each of the groups can look through, like, what's one thing the city does really well for girls and women today? What's one thing that's missing? Like, who would be the right partner to help us, make progress in this area? I really am very excited about this topic, and not because I think there are areas necessarily that we're failing in, but I think there are probably real opportunities that we just haven't identified yet. So those are my thoughts with respect to this summit. As far as publishing the demographics, yes, and thank you to Councilmember Phil Seth for the question, and Mr. Raish for the answer. I'm glad to see that moving forward. And then fundamentally, I do firmly believe that gender is just one of the dimensions that we need to contemplate when we think about all the different kinds of people who live and work and play and study together here in Palo Alto. So I am supportive of the third item as well. And let me just see if I had any other notes. Oh, one of the speakers brought up talking about how we budget, and that certainly wasn't covered in this. And I see that Ms. Say actually is an attendee. Maybe don't want to put her on the spot, but I'll just say that that's something that I think should be part of our medium range plan. Budgets are statements of values, so maybe that'll be something that comes out of the summit, thinking about how to evaluate where we spend money, and if it's spent. I'm just going to use the word fairly for lack of a better one. And thank you so much to staff for already reaching out to Stanford and connecting with PAUSD. We definitely are not an island on this. All right, that concludes my comments. Is either of my colleagues interested in making a motion, or shall we have another round of discussions? Councilmember Phil Seth?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Excellent. Councilmember Koo?
Second.
I was like, is that a second? Is that what that is? Excellent, wonderful. Okay, Councilmember Philseth, would you like to speak to your motion?
Not much, I think. This sounds like a practical way forward. I'm looking forward to seeing it progress.
Thank you. And Councilmember Koo?
Not much also. Thank you for bringing it forward and putting it on the agenda. And I'm excited about the summit that is going to be planned and to attend as well.
Yes.
Hope I'm invited.
I'm pretty sure you and I will be invited. We're the only women who are going to be on council next year. So I think it'd be wise of them to include us. All right, we'll just state that. I don't think that needs to be in motion. Okay, so with that, then I will go ahead and call the vote, and we will go in alphabetical order, which means I'm first. I vote yes. Councilmember Philseth?
Yes.
And Councilmember Koo?
Yes.
All right, and that passes 3-0. Thank you so much to staff, and thank you very much to the members of the public who have worked on this for a long time. I think we have a nice way to start forward. And with that, we move to future meetings and agendas. Any topics that staff would like to mention? I think if we think forward to December, I think we're expecting the legislative update and talking about priorities setting for 2021. We heard from Mr. O'Rourke that he'll be back in January with audit information. Is there anything else that's big on the next couple months, Ms. Henny, we should mention?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
Got it.
And Councilmember Philseth or Koo, anything you'd like us to consider adding to whoever will be on the plate of whoever is on the Policy and Services Committee next year?
No, I don't have anything.
All
right
right,
now.
seeing none. Then unless there's anything else, I'll just check. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I did want to let the public know, the speakers tonight, that we have already shared amongst the staff the article referenced earlier on the integrating gender into the government budget. So we're already hard at work taking a look at the reading assigned to us. So we'll get back to you with more information.
Thank you. Would you be so kind as to circulate that to the members of the committee as well?
Absolutely.
I don't think it was linked in the email, so that'll save us one step.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you so much and good night.
Good night. Thank you.